Yeah, thank you, Chair Hopkins and everybody. Good presentation. So my question goes to some of the things that are the legal parameters around redistricting, but also the other opportunities that are out there. Because as we know, there's some of this is really contained within, if you talk about population and making sure there's equal distribution overall aggregate population between the districts. Number two, though, is California Voter Rights Act and equity, right? I know that there's been cases in Kern County and in others where actually their district were found to be inequitable is the kind way to say it, right? And then, but then you have other things too. And so Bob and Crystal, I think this belies some of the conversations that we might have going forward is there's other stuff that is a consideration. There's geography and shared natural resources. There's issues like incorporated versus unincorporated constituents, percentage-wise, and unincorporated, not just constituents, but communities. So there's this kind of side of it that we've talked about, which is these areas of how do you manage this amongst 5 districts? Because as we know, we can talk about ethnic equity, we can talk about socioeconomic equity, but we've also seen in certain areas that, for example, it's a benefit to have a couple supervisors representing a shared natural resource. So it's not just one person representing a coast or one person representing a fire or watershed. So can you talk about what, anything that is in the actual language of it, and then outside of that, what you're hearing from other jurisdictions about those kind of parameters?
Sorry, I'm looking for the statute so I can pull that up. But generally speaking, on the redistricting or when you're drawing district lines, the intent is to keep communities together and not to split a community with certain exceptions. Clearly, for our board, we have split the city of Santa Rosa among several of the supervisors. That was, I believe, that was intentional. But for unincorporated communities, the general approach is that you follow community lines. If there is a population looking at ethnic makeup, that would get divided if we follow the line strictly. The general consensus among other counties and from the case law is that we should try and keep that ethnic population together to give them a stronger voice. There are other factors you can look at, but you try to, in addition to geographical equity, you're looking at keeping the populations equal, but giving voice to communities to ensure that their vote is not watered down.
Mm-hmm. Good, I appreciate that. I think, one thing that would be nice when we come back with this item is to have some of the past board items that presented demographics, or even what was presented to the board 10 years ago, what was presented to the board 20 years ago. The reason I say that is because I think it'd be helpful as we form this advisory commission to look at, to make sure that they have that information, but also as we're forming the committee, I mean, for instance, I'd love to see it. I don't need to be involved in the decision-making process. I'll knock on doors and serve constituents no matter where they are. But I think it's going to be important because I guess what I'm thinking is that and this is going to go towards our conversation is that if you look at the state independent redistricting commission that went 10 years ago, where there was independent commissions throughout the state, there was dramatic shifts in the mapping, and it wasn't based on dramatic shifts in population. It was Congressman Thompson's district went from, at that point, basically Napa and Solano and Vallejo all the way up to the coast. The district that is now Huffman's district was kind of pinned into the population center of Santa Rosa down into Marin and pushed out in that way. And there were dramatic geographical shifts, even though there wasn't dramatic population shifts, to try and achieve not racial equity or not socioeconomic equity, but land-based equity, to be able to manage stuff, to have contiguousness, right? I think that's just something we're going to have to look at and consider as we go forward. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, well, good morning, Chair Hopkins, members of the board, County Administrator Bratton, and County Council Pittman. Again, Crystal Carey Harrow, Deputy County Administrator for the CAO Policy Grants and Special Projects Division. It's a mouthful. This morning, I'll be presenting along with County Council Pittman an update on the county's redistricting effort. As you know, the U.S. Census Bureau conducts a nationwide census to enumerate the population every 10 years, and your board must adjust supervisorial district boundaries within the county to reflect the new census data and keep supervisorial districts substantially equal in population. There have been significant changes to the process and requirements since the last census. And so in addition to an overview of these changes, I will be sharing a proposed timeline for the county's overall redistricting effort, seek your board's direction for establishing an advisory redistricting commission, and ask your board to consider the use of contingency funds to support specialized redistricting services. I'll turn now over to County Council Pittman to provide the overview.
Thank you, Crystal. Next slide. There we go. So as Crystal mentioned, every 10 years, as you know, the U.S. Census Bureau conducts a nationwide census to update our population, and then that data is used to adjust supervisorial district boundaries within the county to ensure that the districts are substantially equal in population. Division 21 of the California Election Code sets forth the procedures governing redistricting. These procedures, as Crystal mentioned, were recently amended by Assembly Bill 849, known as the Fair Maps Act, and Assembly Bill 1276, known as the Local Redistricting Cleanup Bill. And they prescribe a very rigorous process which the county must adhere to. The focus of the amendments was to revise and standardize redistricting across the state to eliminate discretionary criteria in favor of mandatory requirements with limited local priorities. Next slide. The Fair Maps Act mandates that district boundaries be drawn in a manner that complies with the United States and California constitutions and the Federal Voting Rights Act of 1965. Boundaries may not be drawn to favor or discriminate against a political party, also known as gerrymandering. And boundaries may no longer be altered between census counts, except under certain limited circumstances. Finally, the Fair Maps Act establishes a strict timeline for adoption of the redistricting plan, mandating that final redistricting maps be adopted not less than 174 days before the next regular election. Next slide. The Fair Maps Act mandates a robust public outreach process for redistricting. Under the revised regulations, the county must encourage public participation through a variety of means, including media campaigns, outreach to community groups, and live translation at meetings. The public outreach must specifically be tailored to include minority communities and provide language access. This is done by requiring that the materials provided to those communities be translated into their first languages to ensure full access to the process. The county must establish and maintain a website dedicated to redistricting. The website must, among other things, set forth procedures for testifying or submitting written comments on proposed redistricting maps, include a calendar of all hearings and workshops, and post notices and agendas for each hearing workshop. Next slide. Historically, the county's district maps were drawn by a body comprised of the clerk, recorder, assessor, the district attorney, and the sheriff. The rationale for selecting these officials were that they are elected county-wide, so they had no incentive to alter district boundaries for political gain. The Fair Maps Act amendments now prohibit any elected official from participating in the drawing of redistricting maps. The new rules allow the county to establish either an advisory redistricting commission to make recommendations to the board on the final map, or an independent redistricting commission, which is empowered to create the boundaries without input from the board. All members must be residents of the county. For a variety of reasons, staff recommend that the board appoint an advisory redistricting commission, which Crystal will discuss in more detail shortly. Next slide. Elections Code Section 23,002 authorizes the county to prescribe the manner in which members are appointed to the Advisory Redistricting Commission. No person who is an elected official of the county or a family member, staff member, or paid campaign staffer of an elected official of the county may be appointed to serve on the Advisory Commission. The Elections Code further authorizes local jurisdictions to impose additional requirements or restrictions in excess of those described on the commission, on members on the commission, or on applicants to the commission. So for example, the board could consider racial, socioeconomic, or geographical equity requirements in appointments to the commission. Next slide. The Elections Code mandates that the final redistricting plan be adopted not later than 174 days before the next regular election after January 1st, 2022. For our purposes, the next regular election will be the statewide primary on June 7th, 2022, which requires that your board adopt the final redistricting plan on or before December 15th, 2021. The 2020 census data was initially due to be released on March 31st of this year, but is now expected to be delayed until mid to late September. This delay in the census data will significantly compress the outreach process and timeline for conducting public outreach, community engagement, and public hearings. At the moment, there is no indication from Sacramento that there will be an adjustment in the deadline for adopting final redistricting maps. Next slide. The Fair Maps Act amendments substantially expanded the number of public hearings that the board must hold and imposed additional requirements on these hearings. Under the revised regulations, the board must hold a minimum of 4 public hearings where the public may provide input regarding the composition of the districts. At least one of those hearings must be held after receipt of the census data, but before any redistricting map is drawn. Additionally, at least one of the hearings must be held on a Saturday, a Sunday, or after 6 p.m. on a Monday through Friday. To further ensure the public has time to digest and meaningfully participate in the adoption of the final plan, the draft redistricting map must be published on the website at least 7 days prior to final adoption. Next slide. As previously noted, the county must encourage public participation through a variety of means, including media campaigns, outreach to community groups, live translation at meetings if requested 72 hours in advance, and providing for public testimony through various mediums such as oral testimony, email comments, or public comment portals on websites. The public outreach must specifically be tailored to include minority communities. Next slide. Crystal, can you advance the slide? Sorry. The new regulations require the county to establish and maintain a website dedicated to redistricting. The website must contain the following information: an explanation of the redistricting process, procedures for testifying or submitting written testimony, a calendar of all hearings and workshops, notices and agendas for each hearing and workshop, a record or written summary of each hearing and workshop, and all draft maps and the final adopted map. Additionally, the information contained on the website must be available in any language into which the county is required to translate its ballots. And the website must be maintained for 10 years or until the next census data is released. Next slide. As we noted previously, mid-decade changes are now prohibited under the except under very limited circumstances. In order to make a change between census counts, the court must issue an order through judicial proceedings, or jurisdictional boundaries must change. For example, an unincorporated area incorporates as its own city or is annexed into an existing incorporated city. That would be sufficient to allow us to redistrict. Next slide. District boundaries must comply with the United States Constitution, the California Constitution, and the Federal Voting Rights Act, and must satisfy the parameters set forth on this slide. And with that, I'll now turn it back over to Crystal to describe the timeline for completing the redistricting and staff's recommendations for the Advisory Redistricting Commission.
Thank you, County Council. So as County Council mentioned, the deadline is to approve the maps is on December 15th. I included this previous slide, which is what we understood that when we would receive the census data at the time, but we'll move on to what we now know is our most current information. There is some possibility that the deadline to approve the maps will be delayed, but this is built on what we know at the moment. So just quickly going through the slide, I'll talk about the application process for the Redistricting Commission in a couple of slides here. But what I'm recommending is that the board approve and establish the commission on the April 20th meeting. Sorry, that's a typo. It should be April 20th. And unfortunately, what you see here, given the delay to September 30th in receiving the census data, is a very compressed timeline of meetings, public, both for the commission as well as the board, to get those inputs on the mapping and getting it approved on December 15th. It's just COVID delays have caused these differences in timelines, and I think the whole state is dealing with the same kind of challenges with timeline. Okay, so moving on to the Advisory Redistricting Commission. As Council mentioned, your board has the authority to prescribe the manner in which members of the commission are appointed. And there are two relevant components, composition and criteria. The composition could be composed of, the commission could be composed of district appointees, at-large members, or a combination of both. Staff is recommending a combination of both, either a total of 9 commissioners with 1 appointee per district and 4 at large, or a total of 15 commissioners with 2 appointees per district and 5 at large. In terms of the criteria, this is another component for the at-large commissioners that the board should consider. Criteria could include representation by any number of factors: geographical area, race and ethnicity, age group, industry sector, or any other that you may choose. Once the district appointees are known, the criteria could be applied to the at-large members to ensure a balance of representation on the commission. So if directed by the board, staff would solicit interest in from the community in serving on the commission and return to the board on April 20th with applications and recommendations for appointment. The period for the application would be starting the end of today through March 23rd. It's about a 4-week time frame. And we would keep that, coming back to the board on April 20th would mean another 4 weeks to kind of work through looking at the, making decisions on the appointees, as well as looking what the balance of applicants that might serve to provide that balance across the board. Interested parties would need to complete the application form that is on the current county boards and commissions website, and that web address is here. And as we've also created an email account so that people can ask questions about the process, and that's redistricting2021@sonoma-county.org. And as Council also mentioned, we don't have quite the URL website address yet, but there will be a website dedicated to providing all the relevant and significant information so that we're being as transparent with the public as to what's happening with the effort. Okay, so this is just a revisit of the restrictions and for who can be seated onto the commission. And this just reflects the recommended actions that are in this summary item. The key thing here is that we, beyond what we've already shared in terms of the process, the need to for the board's decision on composition and criteria is the significant need for translation, interpretation, the use of a mapping tool that is user-friendly for the public. We've gotten some estimates and are in need of using contingency funds up to 130,000 for some of those services that we did not anticipate. That is my final slide and concludes the presentation, but we're here for questions.